Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmaswarupine avataravarishthaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha Sruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavad Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram. So today we are going to conclude this part of the class, that is Bhagavad Gita will be concluded today. So just I wanted to give a general background of the emergence of this particular text, Bhagavad Gita, in the Vedantic Hindu canonical tradition. So I mentioned at the very beginning, Bhagavad Gita is a very short, very small fraction of a much greater work called Mahabharata. It has got only 700 verses, and Mahabharata in a shorter version has got more than 100,000 verses. And Mahabharata goes back to 3rd millennium BC, and Bhagavad Gita as a small work, as a spiritual classic, became well known only from 8th century onwards, and that too because of Shankaracharya's commentary. And he was the one who actually brought out Bhagavad Gita and interpreted that book as the essence and the condensation of all the great teachings of the Vedas. Yadidam Gita Shastram Samasta Vedartha Sangraha Bhudam Durvignayartham. At the very beginning, introduction, Shankaracharya says, this Gita is the condensation of all the great teachings of Vedic literature, Vedanta philosophy. Now, so you can see this almost 3,800 years of gap between the emergence of Mahabharata and the appearance of Bhagavad Gita as a separate, as a spiritual classic in 8th century, just because Shankaracharya wrote a commentary on it. And during this long period, a number of new ideas had already emerged in Hindu philosophical tradition. So Shankaracharya interpreted this Gita in the language of 3 separate spiritual disciplines, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and also with a distinct philosophical trend. It's all great, all because of the Bhashya. Now, another great important work that can be compared to Bhagavad Gita, and maybe the only work in Hindu philosophical tradition that may be compared to Bhagavad Gita, is a small work which is actually the condensation of all the teachings of the great teacher Gautama Buddha. It is called Dhammapada. Dhammapada means the path of Dharma, and Bhagavad Gita means a song sung by the Lord. Now, though they bear sort of comparison, even literally, you can see many ideas, many words, many expressions which are found in the Bhagavad Gita are found in the Dhammapada. So, and Dhammapada goes back to the 570, let's say 6th century BC. Dhammapada is a part of the Khuddaka Nikaya, which again a part of Sutta Pitaka, which is one of the 3 Pali canonical traditions, the Vinaya Pitaka, Abhidhamma Pitaka, and Sutta Pitaka. And Dhammapada is part of the Sutta Pitaka tradition. It is included in the Khuddaka Nikaya, which is a part of Sutta Pitaka. Now, in Dhammapada, what you find is an attempt to give a moral framework for the whole humanity, not only to believers and non-believers in God. A moral framework without the aid, without the reference to a creator God. So there is no prayer here. There is no submission to some creator God or any kind of transcendental idea. Here, Buddha says, if you live a pure life, you can be a spiritual person. That's the essence of Dhammapada. Now, living a pure life means practicing certain spiritual disciplines. In the Gita, you find Lord Krishna lays down 3 disciplines for anyone who wants to take to spiritual life. Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga. You cannot find a single human being, any normal human being who leads a normal life, a law-abiding life with some moral principles to guide him or guide her. So you don't find a single person who cannot belong to any of these 3 categories. Those who may be qualified to practice Karma Yoga. Karma Yoga means those who are of an active temperament, who believe in action, doing their duty, again without reference to a God. Do your duty with a sense of sanctity and sacredness, with all honesty and sincerity. Live a normal life. You need not even think of a God and you can become spiritual. Now, Karma Yoga has got this aspect. But for all practical purposes, every Karma Yogi has to offer the results of his actions to God. Ishwarapana Buddhya, like Shankaracharya says. Ramanuja also says the same thing, Ishwarapana Buddhya. With the idea that whatever you do, even your secular actions, farming, doing the duty of housewife, teaching in a university, all these can become a spiritual practice if you do with total sincerity, thinking that is an offering to God. Or you can do it for the good of the world. Loka sangrahameva means if you cannot do anything, do good for the good of humanity, for the good of others and for the good of yourself. So the idea is this Karma Yoga is a distinct spiritual discipline which is very universal, which can be universally applied. Then Bhakti Yoga. If you are a traditional believer in God, it's easy for you. You can pray, you can meditate. Again, you can also practice this offering, this discipline of offering whatever you do as an offering to God. Every action is like a flower that you place at the altar of the Lord. Or Jnana Yoga. Think about the origin of the universe. Think about the eternal reality. Just go in search of the meaning of life and existence, and you can become a Jnana Yogi. But in Dhammapada, what Buddha did was something different. So Dhammapada has got 26 cantos or chapters written in Pali language. You have to remember, Buddha preached in Prakrit, but his teachings were written down in Pali script. About 50 years, according to some traditions, maybe a little later or a little earlier, after Buddha's passing away, there was the first Buddhist council in Rajagriha, and there were still many monks and other laymen who had seen Buddha. So they recorded from their memory, they recorded all the teachings that they remembered that came from Buddha and put in Pali script, which came to be known as Tripitaka, Sutta Pitaka, Vinaya Pitaka, Abhidhamma Pitaka, which contain not only philosophy like the Dhammapada, like Sutta Pitaka, which also contains some of the disciplines for the Buddhist monastic order, and also the training program for Buddhist bhikshus and so on. So these 3 books, 3 canonical traditions in Pali language came to be popular, and they were followed by the Hinayana Buddhist, Theravada Buddhists, who belong to a more traditional, more orthodox, more ascetic tradition. mostly found in Sri Lanka, Burma, and Cambodia, and a few such countries, where Theravada Buddhism became popular, where they used to practice memorization of Dhammapada and other Pali prayers and Pali scriptures. Now, in Dhammapada, what you find is a series of responses that came from Buddha. It was a response to some episodes that happened. Sometimes some disciples put some questions and Buddha answered. More or less Jataka tales. Jataka tales, some disciples or some devotees or friends of Buddha happened to have some conversation, and Buddha finally somehow connected that person's life with some previous life cycles, including his own life cycles, which came to be known as Jataka tales. In Dhammapada, each verse is supposed to be a response from Buddha to some episodes or experiences. I mean, he was trying to explain certain things. There are, of course, many teachings in the Dhammapada which can be directly traced to Bhagavad Gita. But the most telling example is the description of a wise man in the 26th canto. So it is called Brahmana Vaggo. So Vaggo means Varga in Sanskrit. It becomes Pali Vaggo. Brahmana is a word used in Buddha's own words. What about by Brahmana, Buddha did not mean a person belonging to a particular caste or group. What he meant by the word Brahmana is the enlightened person, the spiritual elite. Again, not elitism based on birth or privileges, but based on a person's spiritual evolution and spiritual growth. So what are the characteristics of a Brahmana? A wise person, a spiritually elevated person. Buddha gives a wonderful list of different characteristics of a spiritually enlightened person. In the Bhagavad Gita, in the 2nd chapter, Arjuna is putting a question to Krishna. Sthitaprajnasya ka bhasha samadhisthasya keshava sthitadhikim prabhashedakim asida vrachedakim. In the 54th verse of the 2nd chapter, in which Arjuna asks Krishna, what are the characteristics of a person who is illumined, who is well established in stable wisdom? So the word used in the 2nd chapter is Sthitaprajnaha or Sthitadhihi. These are two words commonly used. A person whose prajna, awareness, buddhi, intellect, emotions, feelings, a whole mental system, is established in stability, well established in spiritual wisdom, who is able to look at pain and pleasure, the duality, with a sense of equanimity and equilibrium of mind. And in answer to this question from Arjuna, Krishna gives a number of characteristics of a spiritually enlightened person. In fact, it begins, of course, there are many, we don't have time to go through all the 18 verses from 55th to 72nd verse. In 18 verses, Lord Krishna gives a list of the essential characteristics of a spiritually enlightened person. In the Dhammapada, in the 26th Vagga, canto, chapter, Buddha also calls a wise man, or considers a wise man as a spiritually enlightened person. And the word he uses is Brahmana. Tam bruhi Brahmanam. Many of the verses in Dhammapada ends Tam bruhi Brahmana, means him I call a wise man, a wise woman, a wise individual. So him I call a Brahmana. That is how Buddha ends many of his verses in the Dhammapada. And the Bhagavad Gita, Sthita Prajnastadochyate, or Sthitadhihi Muniruchyate, like that. I mean, he is a Sthita Prajna, a spiritually enlightened, a stable-minded person, or a person whose mind, intellect is sthita, means well established. So now Shankaracharya gives a clue as to why these characteristics are listed. The list of these characteristics is given. And the purpose of giving this list of characteristics is to give every person a ladder to climb, a path to follow, a road to take to the ultimate spiritual destination. In Buddhist tradition, it begins like this. First of all, you should realize that this world as such is impermanent. So it is called, there is dukkha, there is a cause for dukkha, and if you can remove the cause, dukkha also, the incompleteness, the grief, whatever it is, the imperfection will go away, and the road to and the path to this spiritual destination is the path of Ashtanga Yoga, which he calls Samyak Drishti, Samyak Ajiva, Samyak Vyayama, Samyak Vak, Samyak Smriti. Samyak Smriti is the foundation of mindfulness. Samyak Smriti is extended, is more elaborated in Buddha's own discourse, which is called Satipattana Sutta. In his shorter form, which is a discourse Buddha gave to bhikkhus, to monks, or Mahasati Upattana Sutta, which is a discourse that he gave to the laity. It's a longer version. Mahasati Upattana Sutta means Mahasmriti Upasthana Sutram in Sanskrit. Smriti Upasthana Sutra means Sati Upattana Sutta in Pali, which essentially is a description of the art of remaining in a state of perfect awareness, at the same time totally detached or non-attached to whatever is happening around you, but you are fully aware of it, but you are not attached to it. The ability to look at everything in this world as an object, be aware of it. At the same time, you should be able to see them as a witness. You should not be attached to it. So again, Samyak Samadhi and so on. All these are the fundamental characteristics of this Ashtanga Yoga, or the Eightfold Path, which actually is central to Buddha's spiritual discipline, both Mahayana and Hinayana traditions. Dhammapada gives the characteristics of a person who has followed this Ashtanga Yoga and who has reached Nirvana, who has gone beyond the transmigratory cycle of Praditya Samutpada, which is nothing but a cycle which describes the mystery of birth, life, death, and rebirth. Now, in contrast to this, Shankaracharya says that the characteristics of a spiritually enlightened person in Bhagavad Gita are listed to help every spiritual seeker. Because any person who wants to become spiritually enlightened can slowly practice and develop the characteristics of spiritually enlightened person. So what are the characteristics of the signs, the telling examples from his behavior, the way he talks? What are the characteristics of a spiritually enlightened person? So, for example, Shankaracharya says, Sarvatra hi Adhyatma Shastre Krartha Lakshanani Yani Tani Eva Sadhanani Upadishyante yajnasadhyitvad yani yajnasadhyani sadhanani lakshanani cha bhavanti tani. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha. This is how it begins. So, sarvatra hi adhyatma shastre kritartha lakshanani yani tani cha eva sadhanani vadishyante. In all spiritual literature, this is a very central principle of Advaita. Not only Advaita, all great spiritual classics. That great pronouncement is made here, statement is made here. In all spiritual traditions, wherever you find a list of the fundamental characteristics of a spiritual enlightened person given, the purpose of giving that list is this. These characteristics constitute a road, a path that anyone can follow. You can slowly try to develop those characteristics in your own life. Self-restraint, self-control, all these are great ideas mentioned in both Dhammapada and the 26th Vagga, which is called Brahmana Vagga as I mentioned earlier, and also in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita from 55th to 72nd verse, in 18 verses, Lord Krishna gives a list of characteristics. Prasagadeda kaman sarvan partham manogadan atmanneva atmana tushtasthita prajnastadochide dukkeshu anuddigdhamana sukheshu vigadaspraga vidaragabhaya krodasthitai munichide, etc. It goes on like that. The Shankaracharya says it is meant to help a person so that he can, by his own effort, develop those qualities which will eventually take him to the highest spiritual enlightenment. So this is an important thing to remember. Now, one perhaps we can see in the Dhammapada, to give a few examples, just a few. I mentioned earlier, Dhammapada has got 423 verses, and the last chapter is called Brahmana Vagga, which bears comparison with the description of the characteristics of a Siddha Prajna given in the Bhagavad Gita from 55th to 72nd verse of the second chapter. So in Dhammapada it is said, Yada doyosu dhammesu. So it said dharmasu becomes dhammeshu in Pali. Paragu hoti brahmano adassa sabde samyoga artham gechandi janato. When a Brahmin has crossed duality, gone beyond duality, then all the fetters, all the duality, identification with pain and pleasure, identification with labha, labha, it means gain and loss, all these identifications with diversities will come to an end. So this duality will come to an end. That's the idea behind. And then again, of course, this is again what you find in the Gita, Dukkeshu Anuddigdhamana Sukheshu Vegadaspraha Vidaragabhaya Krodasthiradhihi Muniuchade Ye Sarvatra Anabhisnega Tattat Prapi Shubham Na Abhinandadi Na Dveshti Tasya Prajna Padisthita. Here, Shankaracharya himself writes, of course, the 5th chapter, Bhashya, he writes, Nidvanda Dvandavarjida hi yasmat mahabhako sugam bandhan anayasena pramuchchati. So going beyond dvanda, going beyond duality, going beyond our tendency to see pain and pleasure, good and bad, and get attached to them, or developing an abhorrence, an aversion towards the unpleasant, and a great attachment, the obsessive liking for the pleasant, the happy situation, total aversion for the unhappy situation. These are the characteristics of a person who is not enlightened, who is not a Brahmana. And when you practice Samyak Drishti, Samyak Sankalpa means the right view, Samyak Drishti, Samyak Sankalpa is right resolve, Samyak Vak, right speech, Samyak Kamma, Samyak conduct, Samyak Ajiva, Samyak livelihood, samyak vyayama, samyak effort, and samyak smriti, which is actually mindfulness. Samyak memory and samyak samadhi, proper right concentration. When you develop all these qualities, what happens is you transcend all these dualities. Such a person becomes dukkheshu adhyatmigadishu prapteshu na uddignam na prakshubidam dukkha praptu mano yasya sa ayam anuddigdamana. Then you are not too much worried, you are not alarmed, you are not shocked when something unpleasant happens. And of course you are not overjoyed when something pleasant takes place. Again, you will get rid of, in our actual behavior with others, we will be totally devoid of raga and dvesha. That is also mentioned here. Yata dvayosu dhammesu. That means the duality. Duality means extreme liking for the pleasant and extreme aversion for the unpleasant. It also means extreme attachment to something and its opposite to something else. Total absence of this is an important characteristic of a spiritually enlightened person in the Bhagavad Gita and of a person called a Brahmana in the Dhammapada. Again, I want to repeat again and again, Buddha was a great revolutionary who actually revolted against the prevailing practice of casteism in India when he emerged in the 6th century BC. So when he used the word Brahmana, again he did not mean any particular class or group. What he meant was a person who is spiritually elevated, who can look at things from a mind, from a state of equilibrium of mind. That's why, and Gita also says the same thing. Vida raga, bhayakrodho ragascha bhayamcha krodhacha vidaha vigada yasman sa vida raga bhayakrodhaga sthidadhihi sthidapraknyaha muni sannyasi tada uchide kimcha. This is Bhashikara Shankaracharya's own statement. So you can see practically not only similarity in the description of an enlightened person in the Dhammapada and also in the description of a Siddhaprajna, again a spiritually enlightened soul in the Bhagavad Gita. And then again you can find, of course, I am just giving some examples only. Then I will come to some important subject as a conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita. In the 12th chapter, again in the description of a devotee of God, Santushta Satadam Yogi Yadatma Dhranischeka Mayarpida Manobuddhis Yoma Bhakta Samay Preha, etc. These are the essential characteristics of a real devotee of God. Remember, Buddha did not accept a creator God. Buddha often asked this question. As you know, in modern times, many of the agnostics and atheists, they question God, and frequently even they question God, when they even try to ridicule the idea of God. What they are mostly doing is they are ridiculing the idea of God as understood in the popular Abrahamic traditions. Not all, but in some of them, God is portrayed as a most uncompromising creator, who is a little bit of a dictator, who tempts certain people with heaven and who condemns certain people to hell. You can find all this. So they cannot question Buddha, because Buddha doesn't talk about a God. People may ask him the question, why should you bring a religion to create a moral framework? Buddha's distinct contribution is that he gave a moral framework to humanity without referring to God. The idea is Buddha believed in the spiritual unity and oneness of existence. And it is not just a concept, it is something that we practice in our life. And this can only be practiced when you develop a mental framework. And that mental framework requires that you should first of all recognize the fundamental impermanence of empirical world, empirical phenomena. And that impermanence itself is actually called dukkha. You can get out of this dukkha through the practice of these 8 fundamental disciplines, like the right conduct, right attitude, right effort. Some make vyayama, some make ajiva, some make samadhi, some make drishti, some make walk, and so on. Everything should be samyak, mean proper, the right attitude, the right word, the right conduct, the right effort, the right way of concentration, the right mindfulness, all this. Then only you will be able to really practice a universal moral law. So he insisted that one should first of all understand that everything that we normally consider to be sacred in this world, something enjoyable in this world, is essentially impermanent. Again in the 390th mantra he says, na brahmanas tedati kinchit sebhyo yada nisebdhu manasopiyahi. You often find, Sanskrit gets little corrupted when it becomes Pali. Because Pali was essentially an unrefined form of Sanskrit. Its spoken form was Prakrit, but its script was Pali. In that language, in the Pali language, is Dhammapada was written. Yato himsamano nivattadi. So nivartadi or nivartade in Sanskrit becomes nivattadi in Pali. Tato sammadimeva dukkham. Nothing is better in an enlightened person, a Brahmin, than this, that he is able to restrain his mind from pleasurable things. So the ability to restrain the mind, to keep the mind away from enjoyments, that is an important characteristic of a spiritual enlightened person. And he will be totally free from the feeling, this is mine, I am the person who owns this place and this place belongs to me. And this feeling that I am the person who is the owner and the place belongs to me, it makes us attached to sukha and creates an aversion in our mind towards dukkha. But the real spiritual seeker, the real enlightened person is Advaita sarvabhudanam maitra karuna evacha. He is a friend of all living beings. He is compassionate. He is sympathetic towards everyone. Nirmamaha nirahankaraha. He is totally free from the feeling that he is mine. He doesn't have an identity. I mean, identity in the sense when you identify yourself as the body-mind complex, it is called ahankara. And that person, that is sama dukkha sukha kshami. So when he faces sukha, a happy experience, he is not overjoyed, he is restrained. And also when he has to face an unpleasant situation, then also he is restrained, he doesn't lose his sleep, he is not shocked. That ability to keep our mind in a state of equilibrium is an important characteristic of a sthita prajna and also a brahmana, as indicated in the Dhammapada. You can find the same thing in the Bhagavad Gita, of course in Shankaracharya's commentary you find here. Shankaracharya says, Adveshta sarvabhudanam sarvesham bhudanam na dveshta atmano dukkhakedum api na kaschid dveshti sarvani bhudani atmatvena hi pashyati. You can see a philosophical contrast here. Shankaracharya says the reason for this feeling of unity and oneness of existence, he says, sarvani bhudani atmatvena hi pashyati. You look at the entire creation as non-distinct and non-different from yourself, because you are Atman and the same Atman is present as Sarvantaryami, as the inner resident in all beings. So this equality, equanimity, oneness and unity, based on the spiritual concept that Atman is present in everything, that is the real justification to say that a spiritually enlightened person is a friend of all and an enemy of none. Advaita sarvabhutanam. He is non-hostile towards everyone. That's the literal meaning. Means he doesn't have any hatred towards anyone. Maitra karuna evaja. He is a friend of everyone. He is sympathetic towards everyone. Nirmamaha. And this is possible only when we don't feel it belongs to me only, or I am the owner. And samadukha sukakshami. This attitude will naturally create a restraining quality in our mind. But then he says, Bhashikara Shankaracharya says, the reason is Sarvani Bhudani Atmatvena hi pashyati. Everything is Atman. Now in Buddha's philosophy, there is no Atman. Anattavada is one of the central thesis, one of the central principles of Buddhism, both in Hinayana and also Mahayana. Anattavada. Now the point is frequently it is stated that when Buddha refused to accept a thing like Atman, what he meant was that he was refusing to accept anything in this world of a permanent nature. He was unwilling to accept that there was anything in this world which is of a permanent nature. That was what he actually implied. He did not reject the existence of some ultimate reality which is unchanging. Actually, in one of the early schools of Vijnanavada, which actually belongs to Mahayana Buddhism, there is a school called Alaya Vijnanavada, which believed that there is a platform, Alaya Vijnana, within us, and all the impressions, all the empirical experiences come and go on this platform. But platform remains the same. It was again rejected in the later centuries when another school of philosophy became popular. It's called the Pravritti Vijnanavada. It's a later school, which actually rejected both subject and object. Anyway, there's a different subject. It's not part of our discussion right now. It may come up for discussion when we do this, when we focus on different schools of Buddhism. So one thing to remember is these Vijnanavada and Shunyavada, in a way, were essentially part of the development of Buddhist philosophy within India. When Buddhism traveled outside, it got localized in the places where it went, where it became accepted among the common people like China, Japan, other countries. So the Buddhist tradition within India actually followed a different course. So the idea is simple. In Gita, in the Bhagavad Gita, you become a friend of all when you become spiritually enlightened. This happens because you realize the presence of one absolute reality in everyone called Atma. Shankaracharya says, Sarvani Bhudani Atmatvena hi pashyati. Everything is Atman. That's how you see it. In Buddhist tradition, it is because everything in this world is impermanent. And because you practice the Ashtanga Yoga, when you practice this Ashtanga Yoga, you naturally become compassionate, friendly with everyone. That's why compassion became an important cardinal principle of Buddhism. It was naturally a part of Vedanta, but in Buddhism, it got a special emphasis because Buddhism perhaps did not go very deep into the metaphysical aspect of morality. It rather emphasized the practical aspect of morality. So you can find in Buddhist tradition these qualities are emphasized not in his connection, not in relation to the metaphysical system, but rather as a distinct spiritual practice of community living. That's the idea behind here. And Shankaracharya again writes here, you can find Maitra Mitra Bhavo Maitri Mitradaya Vatadeti Maitraha Karuna Evacha Karuna Kriba Dukhitishu Deya Tadan Karunaka Sarabhuda Vayapradaka Sannyasi Tyatha. So you are a friend of everyone because you are friendly in your attitude towards everyone. Because you don't have anyone else in front of you. The total absence of otherness is completely removed in the Advaitic tradition, the Gita. The total absence of otherness. There is no otherness. The total absence of otherness is an important characteristic of the Gita's, Bhagavad Gita's teachings. It means, Atma Sarvani Bhudani cha Atmatvena Pashyati. Everything is Atman. Everyone is Atman. That is behind. So the whole creation is the expression of one supreme reality. So in Buddhism, you don't find this emphasis of the unity and oneness of the whole creation at a metaphysical doctrine. You don't find it. But at the same time, you should develop compassion towards everyone. Because that is the one way of practicing the qualities of Ashtanga Magga, Ashtanga Yoga. Means Samyak Drishti, Samyak Vyayama, etc. Now we are coming to another very important portion. It's again found in the second chapter. Yassarago nadoso chamano makho napadido sasa poriva araga tamaham bruhi brahmanam. Him I call a spiritually enlightened person, a brahmana, who is totally free from lust, ill will, pride and envy, and is completely free from all other imaginable, conceivable vices. And it gives a comparison is given. Sasaporiva araga tamakam bruhivamanam. It's like a mustard seed that slips off from the point of an awl. That's the idea behind it. It's an interesting comparison. In the Gita, you can find, of course, the idea that one should be totally free from all imaginable human characteristics like raga, dvesha, abhinivesha and all these should be, that's an important characteristic here. So I am reading a similar verse from the Bhagavad Gita and its commentary. So Dhammapada insists that you should be totally free from all impurities of mind. And these impurities of the mind becomes impure when we develop an extreme attachment towards something or extreme aversion towards something. Yasya rago cha doso. So dosha becomes doso in Pali. Chamano makho na patido. So a person who is spiritually enlightened will be totally free from raga and dvesha. In the Gita, in the maybe in the, I think the 18th chapter, Lord Krishna says, Buddhya vishuddhaya yukto dhrityatmanam niyammeja sabdadin vishayan styaktva ragadvesho vidarsya. Here also in the Gita also you find giving up raga and dvesha, extreme liking for certain things and extreme dislike or hostility to certain things. They are responsible for creating in our mind um, all sorts of prejudices, feelings of hatred, hostility, jealousy, and so on. Because if we are obsessed to certain things, if we have an extreme liking for certain things, it is inevitable that we will have a strong aversion to certain other things. One cannot exist without the other. We cannot have extreme attachment, extreme liking for anything without having extreme aversion towards its opposite. That's why Lord Krishna says, Visuddhaya buddhya yuktaha. Somebody who is endowed with pure intellect, pure mind. And Shankaracharya says, Buddhya adivasayatmikaya visuddhaya maya rigidaya yukta sambannaka trutya dhairyana atmanam karyakarana sanghadam niyamyacha niyamanam krutya vasikritya, etc. So one important point, remember, is Shankaracharya brings in this idea of Maya as a power which is responsible for all these dvandas, raga and dvesha, extreme liking and extreme dislike, all these. So Maya expresses itself in the form of extreme aversion or extreme dislike for certain things. Now this Maya or this impurity can be removed according to Advaita by reading scriptures, by listening to spiritual ideas, by creating positive samskaras in our mental system, thereby increasing or generating fresh spiritual tendencies in our mind, thereby subordinating negative tendencies. So our mind is like a bundle. It has got a lot of negative samskaras and lot of positive samskaras. When there is a higher percentage of negative samskaras, mind cannot accept or appreciate or feel at home when you talk about spirituality, when you talk about higher philosophy. So mind will go after something which it finds very suitable to it. Because whatever samskaras and tendency we have in our mind, we will have a tendency to accumulate more of that. That's why people who have accumulated certain negative tendencies will have it. We have a natural habit of attaching their mind to similar experiences which will generate similar tendencies. Now here Shankaracharya says one should listen to scriptures and teachers from whom we can learn higher spiritual ideas, and that will help us to purify our mental system. In Buddha's tradition, it is the practice of Ashtanga Yoga. So Buddha makes it very simple. In fact, one of the distinct characteristics of Buddha is he was totally averse to any kind of speculation or philosophy. Buddha did not believe in giving a philosophical system. So he simply said, have the right word, samyak vak, right action, samyak vyayama, right livelihood, samyak ajiva, samyak smriti, right memory, and so on. So if you have got the right mind, the right word to speak, the right way to do things, the right way to concentrate, and the right perspective, samyak drishti, the right view, and so on, then you can reach your destination. It's more or less like one aspect of Patanjali Yoga Sutra's Kriya Yoga, the first sutra of Sadhana Pada you find. Tapaswadhyaya Isa Panidhananani Kriya Yoga, which actually includes Karma Yoga also. So Buddha tells us, you just generate good tendencies, good impression, good samskaras. Shankaracharya, on the other hand, he tells us the same thing, but he gives a different method. He says, right now we have a lot of wrong ideas, negative tendencies, negative impressions, samskaras in our mind, which prevent us from taking the right road towards our spiritual destiny. That's because there is a higher percentage of negative samskaras. So we should reduce the percentage of negative samskaras so that their power to influence our mind will be reduced. For that, you should generate more and more positive samskaras. Samskaras cannot be wished away. They can only be reduced to a dysfunctional state of operation. They won't disappear. But they at the most, if you succeed through nirodha, you may be able to reduce them to the status of a burned seed. So if you burn a seed and you put it in a fertile soil, it will not sprout. So these negative samskaras become dysfunctional, non-operative, and that is possible by generating a lot of good samskaras. And this is possible only through Shastra Acharya Upadeshena Jnanotpatti Paripakahedum Sakakaritkaranam Buddhivishuddhyadi Amanitwadi etc. Chapeksha Janidasya etc. This is a long paragraph which it's not within our scope right now. So you should listen to teachers, read scriptures, contemplate on them, and in that way you should purify your mind. When you use the word purifying the mind, what we mean is generating new healthy spiritual samskaras, spiritual tendencies. When we increase the spiritual tendencies, when the percentage of spiritual tendencies become higher than non-spiritual or unhealthy tendencies, then negative samskaras will become practically dysfunctional, they get weakened. That's the idea behind. And for this, Shankaracharya, as in the commentary, he has given 7 disciplines. One is, first of all, we must have a proper understanding of what is real, what is unreal. Then we should be able to uphold the real and discard the unreal. And then we should develop certain qualities like mental restraint, sense control, and so on. Then we should have a strong urge for spiritual liberation. It is called sadhana tatushte sambhati. That is nitya nitya vastu viveka, ihamutra bharabhoga viraga, shamadesha kasambhati, mumukshuttam. And then we should purify our mind through sravana, reading scriptures, listening to higher ideas, contemplating, so that ideas go deeper into our system, and they weaken the negative samskaras, and also there is a corresponding increase of positive samskaras. That will help us in our spiritual journey, that will take us to the same destination, moksha. So the moksha of Advaitins and the nirvana Buddhists are not actually very different. This is an important thing to remember. You can find a lot of debate in different scholarly books between the Buddhist concept of nirvana and the Advaitin concept of Atmanubhuti. One problem from a metaphysical point of view, one problem in Buddhist tradition is, they often compare the nirvana as a extinction of a lamp. So when when the oil gets completely exhausted, the lamp gets dried up. It's no more burning. It no more functions as a lamp. Like that, all trishna, all desires, when they are completely removed, then this samsara, this transmigratory circle or cycle, birth, life, death and rebirth, going through this 12-link chain of praditya samutpad. This comes to an end. So there is no more birth, so there is no more death. You attain nirvana. So the Advaitins ask a question: if there is no Atman, then who is attaining nirvana? And in some Buddhist traditions, they often mention that this nirvana is associated with a bliss. So if it is associated with a bliss, there should be somebody to enjoy, to experience this bliss. So this kind of debate you'll find as a different subject. We will discuss this on some other occasion. So with this we are concluding our discussion of the Bhagavad Gita. But you can anytime during our discussions in future, you can come back to the subject and ask questions. You are most welcome. Now we have interaction. Thank you. Namaskar.
My question is regarding the balance between the accessibility and simplicity of Buddhism in terms of ethics. In other words, the practical motivation to live in a well-working society, cooperatively. That depends upon sometimes a sense of common interests and common experience. When those interests start to diverge, it seems to me that without non-duality, without a lack of otherness, then it's going to be harder to maintain a consistent ethical focus.
Absolutely, absolutely, that's right. In fact, Vivekananda considered Buddha as an exponent of Upanishadic philosophy with a different emphasis on humanism. That is Vivekananda's take on Buddha. It's very interesting. So in Buddhism you find this simplicity and directness. See, Buddhism offers something to you directly. But if you read the discussion, the debate between Advaitins and Buddhist sources in the Bhasha literature, you find the metaphysical side of Buddhism is somewhat weak and shaky, but that doesn't in any way take its greatness away. That doesn't take greatness away from it. That's primarily because Buddha himself wanted it that way. Whenever his disciples put questions to Buddha on higher metaphysics, ontology, origin of the universe, nature of the universe, evolution, Buddha practically shunned them. And he, in response to those questions, he narrated some stories from his own life, Jataka tales, or some of these verses according to the chroniclers. Some of these verses are Buddha's responses to questions on the metaphysical side of morality. So this is an important thing. Buddha wanted it that way. He had a strong anti-speculative tendency in him. It could be partly because those times were remarkable for a large number of scholars, philosophers in India, mostly Upanishadic philosophers, who were debating among themselves on many metaphysical sides, at the same time not giving much importance to the practical application. So Buddha came as a revolutionary. He revolted against this kind of the academic metaphysical culture. So you find Buddha gave different emphasis. He wanted to emphasize that you have to live a good life in this world, on this earth. So, and on this earth, when you live in this world, you practice all these disciplines, then you can get out of this samsara. So there is so much of reference to samsara in this Dhammapada. Samsara means this transmigratory cycle, birth, life, death and rebirth, because it is desire that is responsible for this samsara. But remember, maybe that was why he did not give much importance to metaphysical questions. He had a strong anti-metaphysical, anti-speculative tendency. Yeah.
I'm still curious how contemporary Buddhists and Buddhist scholars resolve the metaphysical questions. Do they say, never mind, that's not important?
Yeah. Now here I have to explain this. Remember, so Buddhist philosophy, if you go to any library, you find the number of books on Buddhist metaphysics, Buddhist philosophy is so huge. So this may appear to be very strange. But now, in the Hinayana Buddhist tradition, and that is Theravada, to which this Dhammapada belongs, to which in fact, and Pali canonical tradition is central to Hinayana Buddhism. did not pay much attention to metaphysical system, but the Mahayana Buddhism produced outstanding philosophers. Nagarjuna is perhaps the greatest dialectician, next only to Shankaracharya in India's philosophical tradition. Nagarjuna, Vasubandhu, Chandrakirti, who was a commentator of Nagarjuna's Madhyamika Karika. So there were innumerable great followers, great metaphysicians in India. They were mostly traditional Hindus who were well versed in Sanskrit and Vedas, who actually became Buddhists. This began to take place from 2nd century BC onwards. Now that happened within India, and that actually led to the disappearance of Buddhism as a religion in India, because right from 2nd century up to around 7th century, you can find all these great philosophers, like beginning with Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti, Vasubandhu, Dignaga, Asanga, and so on, both belonging to Mahayana system, but one belonging to Shunyavada like Nagarjuna, and others belonging to Vijnanavada. They were refuting among themselves, and they all wrote books in Sanskrit. And Buddha never spoke a word in Sanskrit. He spoke Prakrit, the language of the masses, and his teachings were originally written in Pali, the script of Prakrit. But these great metaphysicians, Nagarjuna wrote Madhyamika, which is called Moola Madhyama Shastram or Madhyamika Karika, is the Bible of Shunyavada. And Chandrakirti wrote a commentary on it. And also Dignaga. Dignaga, one of the greatest names in India's Nyaya tradition, logical tradition, is the exponent of the Madhyama Nyaya. Gautama belongs to the early school of Nyaya system, and Dignaga belongs to the Madhyama school. And now he was teaching in Nalanda University, only Sanskrit, nothing to do with Prakrit or Pali. So you can see the diversion. These Orthodox Hindus who are well versed in Vedanta and Vedas and Sanskrit, they flocked into Buddhism and wrote all these great books. Buddha would not have recognized as his. And then came Shankaracharya in 8th century. So what was the philosophical landscape in India when Shankaracharya came in 8th century? Buddhism had travelled a long distance from Buddha. You have to remember 13 centuries, not a short period. Buddha 6th century, Shankara 6th century BC, and Shankara 8th century AD, 800 plus 600. This is a long period. So during this time, 4 distinct schools of Buddhism, philosophical schools of Buddhism emerged. 2 belonging to Mahayana system, that is Vijnanavada and Shunyavada, and 2 belonging to Hinayana system, Sautrantika and Vaibhashika. Vijnanavadins and Shunyavadins were idealists. They did not accept the reality of empirical universe. Sautrantikas and Vaibhashikas were realists, and there was a lot of confrontation among them. So if you read Gaudavada Karika, who appeared just before Shankara, what he did, he is putting one argument against another from them. So he says how Sautrantikas demolished the Vaibhashikas, how Vaibhashikas countered Sautrantikas, how both of them fought with Vijnanavadins, how all of them fought with Shunyavadins. So each cancelling the other. And Naga, I have given a very elaborate exposition of Mandukya Karika. You can find in YouTube and also in the audios you find. So, actually, Gaudapada, who wrote Mandukya Karika, he refers to 35 schools of philosophy in 6th century AD that he found in India. 35 schools. So they were all fighting among them. Remember, the greatness is they were not fighting with swords, they were fighting with their brains. So, among Buddhists, each demolished the other. But remember, this happened only within Indian subcontinent, not outside. Buddhism had already reached China, Japan, Cambodia, Laos, Mahayana system, Vajrayana system in Tibet, and Hinayana system had already reached Sri Lanka in the 2nd, 3rd century AD, because reached Sri Lanka in the second, 3rd century AD, because Ashoka's own daughter was sent to Sri Lanka as an ambassador. So Burma and Sri Lanka had become the strongholds of Hinayana system. So they remained unaffected by the philosophical warfare that was happening within Indian subcontinent, which at that time included Afghanistan also. Today's Afghanistan and Pakistan also included at that time. So then Shankaracharya came in 8th century. So he found something interesting. He found that Buddhism had become a kind of all-negating nihilism. Within India, remember this did not happen in China or Japan or Tibet. That's why China remained as an important stronghold of Mahayana system. So, but within India what happened, Buddhism had become a kind of all-negating nihilism. Something like an anarchism comparable to a radical anarchist movement that emerged in mid-19th century Russia. Actually, these Dostoevsky, Balinsky, Pushkin, they were in some ways connected with that anarchist movement. So what happened was everything, because so they were called Mahavainashikaha. So you find many of the non-Buddhist schools gave this Buddhist a wonderful name, means the great all destroyers. If you translate this name which they gave to Buddhists called the Mahavainashika, means the great all destroyers, something like that. So what happened was in India there was a need for somebody like Shankaracharya to emerge to defeat those who claimed to be Buddhists in 8th century, who were not. They have traveled a long distance. They moved so far away from, they deviated so far away from original Buddhist teachings. And so he came and he had debates with the Buddhists of all schools, Vijnanavadin, Shunyavadin, Sautrantaka, Vaibhashika, etc. And he had debates with Maimamsakas, Charvakas, and so on. So this is an important thing to remember. So Buddhism became something totally different from what originally was by the time Shankaracharya appeared in 8th century AD.
Thank you, Maharaj. I'm glad they did not lay down their philosophical swords, leaving us without that advancement. There was a YouTube question, and that question asks about reincarnation and how the Buddhism defines it differently from the Hindu concept of reincarnation.
Yeah. Technically, it is not very different. Hinduism, you don't find this naming of the Praditya Samutpada, dependent origination. But the fundamental idea that desire or clinging to life is the real cause of samsara. Samsara means birth, life, death and rebirth, this process, transmigratory cycle. The fundamental cause of the samsara or transmigratory cycle is desire or clinging to life. Trishna, as Buddhists call it. So that in that respect it is almost the same. Only Buddhists call it Praditya Samutpada, because in Buddhism the elaborate description of rebirth is more central than within Hinduism. Hinduism has got this idea of moksha, going beyond all this. When I realize Atman, then the samsara is nothing. Jivan, you can become a Jivan Mukta. Even when you are living in this world, if you are enlightened, you remain totally unaffected. So this idea was there in Hinduism. So Hinduism is the source of the doctrine of reincarnation. But in Hinduism, it is less central than in Buddhism. That's the idea behind it.
Hello, Swami. My question was, am I correct in my understanding that Buddhism, Buddha began the first organized monasticism?
Yeah, historically that should be true. That should be true, because There were monastics, there were monks during when Buddha was born, because Buddha himself saw a monk. That's actually one of the four visions he had. The vision of death, old age, sickness, and then of course the picture of a monk who had transcended all this. So, but I think the organized monasticism maybe it began with Buddha, but there were people, there were great spiritual seekers who lived like monks. So you have to remember Buddha, within 200 years, around that time, we had Confucius in China, Buddha in India, and Jaina Vardhamana Mahavira, Buddha's elder contemporary, and pre-Socratic philosophers in Greece, and Zoroaster in Persia, now called Iran. So you have all these great thinkers who had some transcendental ideas, and some of their disciples also lived like monks. But organized monasticism must be an invention, maybe a new beginning that began with Buddhism, with Buddha, it seems. Yeah.
That seems like a brilliant innovation.
Yeah.
It just, how did he, is there any record of how that occurred? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. The elaborate rules that Buddha laid down you find in Vinaya Pitaka, Abhidhamma Pitaka, for Buddhist monks. He was a great organizer, a great human being, he was a great philosopher, no doubt about it, because between Buddha's going away from his palace when he was 28 years old and his enlightenment, he had already traveled in many places in North India and had learned from many scholars, had debated with many scholars, and naturally he was well versed in Vedanta and Vedic scriptures, because according to some chroniclers, Buddha was sent to Takshashila. It was a university that goes back to 9th century BC. The location is in today's Pakistan. You can still see the relics of Takshashila University. Is an excavation area. You can find it near Islamabad or somewhere in Pakistan. So that was the first university in the subcontinent, and it is said that Buddha was sent there by his father Suddhodana to get trained in all arts and sciences necessary for every prince at that time.
Thank you very much, sir, for your very informative with a lot of references. So I want, I got my own call a doubt or clarification. We are living this materialistic world.
Yeah.
So material world filled full of desires. So how to overcome this desire to attain that? So it may be too big a word to call a nirvana or moksha. So it is really there is a paradox in the day-to-day life.
Yeah.
Can you please
a proper answer would be found from the Bhagavad Gita or Vedantic tradition than from Buddhism, because Buddhism, you'll be surprised to know, Buddhism began as an essentially monastic tradition. Buddhism gave more importance to monastic ideals than to common life situations. But the answer to your question could be found in the Bhagavad Gita. So the Bhagavad Gita tells you that you can live in this world, you should do your duties and responsibilities, you can have all the good things of this world, but at the same time you should also remember that all the good things of the world will not remain, will not last for all time. So that gives us a spiritual common sense. So along with success in material life, efficiency, money, wealth and so on, we should also be able to link ourselves, connect ourselves to some higher idea. And this quest for this higher idea begins with the realization that though wealth is necessary, empirical worldly enjoyments are necessary, they cannot constitute the whole purpose of human life. Along with that, you need something more, because every person cannot, no one can imagine, no one can dream of enjoying complete success or contentment or happiness just by acquiring a lot of wealth or empirical enjoyments. Not possible. So that basic realization of the limitation of empirical enjoyment, worldly enjoyment, success or whatever it is. Again, it doesn't mean that we should shun the realities of the world. You should work hard, do your duty, including if you're a businessman, do your business properly, be a successful businessman, an industrialist if you want, whatever it may be your profession. But along with that, you should also remember that even the richest man may not necessarily be the happiest person. So there is something more required. And that becomes obvious when you look around, that you find the most successful person may not be the happiest person. So for that you look for a higher spiritual value. The spiritual value helps you to combine success in worldly life and at the same time with some higher spiritual purpose. The combination of action and contemplation, material success and some spiritual values. That should be the ideal. This is the answer that you get from the Bhagavad Gita. We have to remember, Buddhism began essentially as a monastic tradition. And primarily Buddha's focus was to attain nirvana. And the ideal of nirvana is somehow linked to monasticism. This is an important thing to remember. That is what it used to be. Of course, in modern times, Buddhism has been reinvented, being reinterpreted. That's very good. Buddhism is certainly a great spiritual force in modern times. Its directness, its simplicity, its practicality and pragmatism are very good. But the ultimate spiritual purpose of human life that you may not get from the pragmatic ideal of Buddhism, you may get it from Vedanta. That's the idea behind it. The Vedanta asks you to combine worldly success and spirituality. Spirituality need not be at the cost of material success. Not necessarily. You can combine both. That's the idea behind it. That's what you find in the Gita. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.